Welcome back, guys and gals. Matty back again. Today I wanted to talk about fears and how they relate to hiking and backpacking trips. For most of us out there, I'm sure when you start thinking about a backpacking trip, there's just a huge amount of excitement that goes along with it. But I do know that there are a bunch of people out there who have some fears and some anxieties when it comes to getting out in the woods, out in the backcountry on a backpacking trip. I just wanted to talk about some of the more common fears that tend to come up. Now, when I say some of the more common ones, I do get a lot of questions on a lot of my videos relating to how do you overcome these fears, how do you get over this, or does this not freak you out when you're out in the middle of the backcountry? So I thought I would talk about some of the ways that I've overcome or helped deal with some of these fears and anxieties when it comes to going out in the backcountry and doing a backpacking trip, or ways that I've seen other people overcome some of these fears and anxieties that they've had. Now, I'm sure most of you guys and gals are aware, I am Canadian and I do all my backpacking trips up here in the gorgeous Canadian Rockies. And up here in my neck of the woods, the most common fear or common concern or anxiety that comes up when people start talking about fears when it comes to backpacking trips and getting into backpacking is the fear of wild animals. In my neck of the woods in Western Canada, up in the Canadian Rockies, we deal with a bunch of different predatory animals that tend to give a lot of people some concerns and some fears and, trigger that anxiety when it comes to backpacking trips. And I'm talking stuff like grizzly bears, black bears, cougars, wolves, you name it. Generally, we have it over here in the Rockies. Now, when it comes to wild animal encounters out in the backcountry, there is no surefire way to guarantee that you're not going to have an encounter with a wild animal out in the backcountry. All that you can do, and the only thing in your power, is do what you can to limit the chances of having an encounter. Now, in general, wild animals want absolutely nothing to do with us. So as long as they know that we are there and they know that we are around, they will generally get out of our way, and chances are you probably are not going to see them. The best way to let a wild animal know that you are in the area is just simply make a lot of noise. Now, there are many different theories behind this, and using the human voice as opposed to items like bear bells or just banging your trekking poles together. The banging your trekking poles and bear bells just generally isn't loud enough, and the human voice actually travels better and is a better tool at alerting an animal to your presence. So simply going down the trail and every couple minutes yelling out, "Hey bear!" In my experience, this is the best way to alert an animal to your presence. When you've got another hiker coming at you from the other direction or coming up behind you, I find that I will notice the hikers that are yelling out significantly sooner than I'll notice the hikers with the bear bells. Like I mentioned before, the bear bells just simply aren't loud enough. Another thing you can do to help limit your exposure to wild animals and having wild animal encounters has to do when you get to camp, and it's got to do with keeping a clean camp. Now, what this means is not leaving garbage laying out. When you're not cooking your food, not leaving your food laying out and about. So say you get to camp, you get your camp set up, but you're not planning on having dinner for a couple hours. Just find a spot to hang your food and hang up your food or store your food properly. If you've got bear lockers available or if you're using a bear canister or an earth sack, find the place that you're going to store your food and store your food and hang it up until you're going to get ready to cook your dinner. Then go and get your food and bring your food out. Doing what you can to limit the temptation for them to come around your camp is going to help limit those encounters when it comes to the wild animals. Now, when it comes to what items you're going to want to store up in your food bag or in the food locker and keep away from animals, anything that's got a smell, so that's going to be your food items, your deodorant, your toothpaste, anything that's going to have some smells to it that could attract a wild animal. But like I said, these steps are not a surefire way to completely eliminate the risk of encountering a wild animal out on trail. It can still happen. That's why you always make sure you've got your last line of defense and pack your bear spray when you're out in bear country. I'm not trying to spark the debate between bear spray and a firearm. I just know in my research, studies have shown bear spray is far more effective. That goddamn Canadian stirring the pot. Now that we have got the controversy train rolling, let's dive into the next fear we're going to talk about, and that's the fear of getting lost. Now, when it comes to the fear of getting lost on a backpacking trip, the best advice I can give you comes before you even hit the trail, and that's plan, plan, plan. And when it comes to planning, I'm talking about using stuff like guidebooks, maps, looking up trip reports or blogs from people online that have done the trip previous to you, and even reaching out to them to ask them any questions that you may have on the trail. I also suggest looking into some online tools like CalTopo and Google Earth to help familiarize yourself with the trail that you're going to be hiking. And while you're going through and doing all this research, one thing that I do is I always keep notes on every trail that I'm going to do, and I take those notes with me when I'm out on trail. So if I know that I've got some major landmarks or major water crossings or something that I may encounter out on trail, like say a previous trail report reported some deadfall at say kilometer 21, I'll just jot that down in my notes so I kind of know what to expect. Now, as I mentioned, I'm only really going to talk about some of the more common fears that people tend to bring up when it comes to backpacking trips. So at the end of this video, if there's any fears that you guys and gals have overcome or dealt with that I don't talk about today, let me know in the comment section down below and maybe let us know how you overcame that or how you're dealing with that. It just may help somebody else who's dealing with the same fear out on a backpacking trip. The next fear we're going to talk about is one that I personally had to overcome when I got into backpacking. We're talking about that fear that creeps in when it gets dark. My first backcountry experiences came when I was in my teenage years. I was about 15, and my dad took me out on some hunting and backpacking trips with him and some of his buddies. This was a fear that never really crept into my mind on my very first couple backpacking trips, and I'll honestly just say that's probably because I was out there with my dad and I kind of had that security blanket of having my dad out there with me. The very first backpacking trip that I did with some of my high school buddies, where I honestly just didn't have my dad there at the time, I 100% got the heebie-jeebies at night, and I had a couple nights out there in the backcountry where I barely slept a wink, and that fear of the dark, that fear of the woods in the dark totally got me. So if you guys are dealing with that fear, I totally understand, and we're going to talk about some of the ways that I personally overcame that fear that I had, because I was absolutely in love with backpacking and I refused to let the fear get the best of me. I'm sure we've all been there where you're laying there in the dark and you hear some noises, you hear a branch crack, all those thoughts start going in your head of what's out there, what could it be. Pretty easy to get some wild thoughts going through your head at night. But if you're in this situation, the best thing you can do is remind yourself, hey, I watched Matty's video and I took his advice on the first tip he was talking about when it came to wild animals, and I've kept a clean camp and I have properly hung and stored my food. So the chances of having a wild animal come through my camp are pretty slim. But before you even get to that situation, I always suggest, when it comes to using a shelter for the backcountry, test this out at home. Testing your shelter out at home serves two purposes. First, it's going to familiarize you with the shelter, so you know the setup process, so you're not struggling with setup. Or say you buy a new tent and it just happens to be missing a couple pieces or missing your poles or something like that. You're going to know that you've got everything there with you, and you're going to be familiar with how to use it. So when it comes to setting it up in the backcountry, it's not a struggle. But the second way that this is going to help you is if you sleep in your shelter at home a couple times before you take it out on a backpacking trip, you're going to familiarize yourself with the shelter itself. So if you're one of those people that tends to have trouble sleeping in an unfamiliar location, this is going to give you that little bit of comfort and familiarity with your shelter. Another thing that may really help you out when it comes to sleeping at night out in the backcountry and just kind of getting over that fear of the dark out in the woods in the backcountry is making sure you carry a good, reliable light source with you, be that your headlamp or a flashlight. Make sure that you know it works. Make sure you've got extra batteries for it. There's absolutely nothing worse than getting up in the middle of the night and having to go take a pee and finding out that the batteries for your headlamp or your light are completely dead. So always make sure you pack a fresh set of batteries for your headlamp or your flashlight, or a way to recharge it if it is USB rechargeable. And don't be afraid to carry some comfort items with you for when you crawl into bed, to kind of help take your mind off things and help you slip into that perfect sleep in the backcountry. Stuff like bringing a book, or what I do is I always load some movies onto my phone, and I like watching a little bit of a movie before I go to sleep. Whether it's to overcome the sound of the noisy creek next to you, or I have heard of a bunch of people using earplugs to help overcome the claustrophobic effect of sleeping inside a sleeping bag and a small tent when they're out on a backpacking trip, it may be worth packing some earplugs. Don't overlook bringing some earplugs with you to help you sleep at night. And like I said, if there are any other fears that you guys and gals have dealt with that I haven't talked about today, let me know in the comment section down below, and let me know how you guys dealt with those fears and why you guys are typing those up. Head on over here, find a video in this playlist, because I need all the watch time I can get to buy up all the diapers for my kid coming in June. So like I said, find a video in this playlist. As always, guys, I am Matty. Thank you guys so dang much for watching, and I'll see you guys on the next one.